Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. Those arms control talks in Geneva. Why did the Russians come? We'll talk live with a Soviet diplomat, a U.S. expert on arms control, and a former deputy director of the CIA. We'll ask them all whether massive coverage by the world media is raising too many expectations.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Such meetings were once routine, and scarcely an eyebrow would be raised when the foreign minister of the Soviet Union sat down for talks with the U.S. Secretary of State. But 4 years of frosty relations between Washington and Moscow and a break of more than a year in all nuclear arms negotiations have apparently created a voracious appetite for any sign, however modest, that the superpowers are ready to return to the bargaining table. That appetite, however, is unlikely to be sated for very long by what comes out of Geneva this week. Today, reporters, commentators, and experts were reduced to the modern equivalent of examining chicken entrails. The length of the meetings, the pre-meeting frowns, the post-meeting smiles. Tomorrow, perhaps, when the talks adjourn, there will be more, but not, one can safely predict, a great deal more. These are very preliminary talks indeed, but the fact that they are underway and the concerns on each side that have made them possible can be discussed in much greater detail. We will do that tonight. But first, Barry Dunsmore captures the atmosphere and the expectations in Geneva.
Everybody's afraid of war between Russia and the U.S., and it's like it could happen any minute.
You know, my hope is that if they keep talking for years, at least during those years, we won't have to worry about getting bombed.
I know the people want peace, and I think our people want peace. So let's hope that they get the message. We all want peace, because peace now means survival.
The place is Geneva, but the fear of nuclear war and the hopes of preventing it are universal. Those fears and hopes are fueling the intense international attention which this U.S.-Soviet meeting is now receiving.
It's inevitable. We're here in our hundreds. Of course we are. There's nowhere else to be.
At least 1,000 international journalists are here.
The American big guns line up to talk peace with the Russians.
For days, the meeting has been the top story on every European newscast.
I'm Peter Jennings in Geneva. On ABC,
the 3 American television networks have sent their top anchormen, and their major news programs are being produced and transmitted from Geneva.
Out of all these meetings today. John?
It might be said that never have so many been sent to watch so few to learn so little.
You said no questions, Mike, and I said there's no answers either.
Tonight, the main story was how much smiling there was at the American reception.
It seems to me that they met with you before.
How the talk's going?
No interviews yet.
However, as Schultz and Gromyko finished up their first round of talks today, what we know of their opening positions is not conducive to boundless optimism. This is what the Soviets want to head off, the American Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. They fear American scientific superiority, and they can't afford it. But the U.S. is determined not to give up the right to research and develop space weapons. And this is what the U.S. wants to curb, Soviet land-based missiles. But if the Soviets can't compete with the U.S. in space weapons, they are unlikely to be willing to reduce the very missiles that space weapons will be used against. This raises the question of whether Ronald Reagan will ever be willing to make the concessions which would make an agreement possible. Doubters point to the role of Richard Pearl, Assistant Secretary of Defense, who is part of the U.S. delegation here. Pearl was recently portrayed by the Washington Post as the man who doomed détente and the strongest single force against arms control. As to what the Schultz-Gromyko meeting will actually accomplish, Mr. Pearl had this to say. They're going to produce this mouse. It will scurry across the stage, and the press will say, that was it? Actually, at this stage, the journalists here are not that skeptical.
I've got to feel they've got something pre-cooked. I can't believe that Gromyko and Schultz have come this far to have a breakdown.
Well, it really is important because for 4 years, these two countries have been saying the silliest things about each other and not doing what diplomacy is all about, namely trying to work things out, manage the relationship.
How long will it be before there is some kind of an arms control agreement, new one, between the U.S. and the Soviets?
If you mean a meaningful agreement, I think it's years away. If you mean some statement of good intentions, because I do agree with Les, they're making an effort to improve their relations, there can be some goody-goody type of agreement that wouldn't be hard to put together. But a substantive agreement that really cuts back strategic and intermediate-range weapons will take a long time, especially since the Soviets are determined to do something about the Star Wars program, and the administration is just as determined not to yield.
Greg, what's your gut feeling?
I think it'll be at least a year. I also think that eventually Star Wars will be put on the table in some context. I can't believe they're really going to be able to keep it off indefinitely.
Les, I would bet against an agreement within the next year or two, and I think if it doesn't happen in that time frame, it isn't going to happen in the second Reagan administration. After that, he's going to face the same sort of opposition, major difficulties from American conservatives that his predecessors faced.
As for George Shultz and Andrei Gromyko, they will again be facing each other at the table tomorrow. This is Barry Dunsmore for Nightline in Geneva.
Later in this broadcast, we'll talk with a former top CIA official who is an expert on missile defenses, Admiral Bobby Inman, and with Time magazine correspondent Strobe Talbot, a specialist on arms control. But first, when we return, we'll get the Soviet view from Alexander Podakin, an official at the Russian embassy in Ottawa.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Sealy Mattresses.
Every day you rush, my lady. Every day you race.
A good night's sleep on Sealy's Best can help you experience your best.
You're pushed, you're pulled, but you do your best, and you do it with such grace.
Because Sealy Posturepedic is uniquely created to give you sheer comfort to ease the day's stress, you'll experience your best after you experience Sealy Posturepedic.
You do your best, and you do it with such grace.
I'd like to propose a toast to dinner.
Introducing the newest Le Menu dinners, like flounder with savory salmon mousse and tender chicken cordon bleu.
Here's to a superb dinner. And to the beautiful woman who had the taste to serve it.
There's always something special on the menu.
Boy, it's great to be on vacation.
Yeah, and we never go on vacation without Hertz.
I wouldn't risk my vacation with an unreliable rent-a-car company.
And Hertz affordable weekly rates save me money.
But people say Hertz is more reliable.
But now, Hertz costs less money.
Arnie, more reliable.
Less money.
Arnold, more reliable.
Less money.
Hertz Affordable Florida, only $79 a week. Now the rent-a-car company that gives you more is less.
Less money.
Boy, they let anybody in this place. These guys lighten up.
The makers of La Yogurt have done it. It's new. It's different. It's
chocolate. La chocolate. It's yogurt. La chocolate. La marvelous. La masterpiece. La simple. La healthy. La special. La chocolate.
And it's full of surprises.
La cherry. La strawberry.
Yet with no more calories than most everyday yogurts.
La banana. La nut. La triumph. La breakthrough. La chocolate.
I'm Peter Jennings in Geneva. Tomorrow on World News Tonight, the second day of Soviet-American talks about arms control. Will there be fewer nuclear weapons, or will there be another arms race?
Joining us live now from station CJOH in Ottawa, Alexander Podakin, press attaché at the Soviet Embassy in Canada. Why did the Soviet Union agree 13 months after walking out of similar talks to come back now?
Well, Ted, first of all, we did not agree. We suggested that the talks begin. And the United States have agreed to it, and we are happy to be, again, talking on a high level.
I stand corrected. Then why did you suggest it? 13 months ago, you were saying when you walked out, I mean, you, institutionally speaking, were saying as long as the United States deployed its cruise missiles and its Minutemen in Europe, the Soviet Union would not talk. Here you are now.
Yes, but this is another set of talks, and it has a very clear-cut aim as far as the Soviet Union is concerned. This is to stop the nuclear arms getting into the skies. One thing, this is to curb the nuclear armaments, to stop the arms race, and possibly, if the other side agrees, to get some reduction of strategic and medium-range nuclear weapons. So this is another set of talks, and we just don't see how we can sit on both sides of the ocean with no talks between us. This would lead us nowhere. And the main reason why we suggested the talks be held is that we want a more secure peace, a more stable world situation, more cooperation on any possible level between East and West.
Let me just quickly correct something I said a moment ago. I said Minutemen and cruise missiles. I obviously meant Pershings and cruise missiles. But let me pick up now for a moment on something you said. It makes it sound, Mr. Podolkin, as though President Reagan was absolutely right in proceeding with this, what has been called the Star Wars Initiative or the Strategic Defense Initiative, if what that did was to so concern you in the Soviet Union that you then proposed to have these talks. Maybe that was all to the good.
Well, it does not necessarily coincide with what Mr. Reagan had to say or with the introduction of this Star Wars concept. We have been always against adding new spirals for the arms race, and we have always been against pushing the arms into the areas where there have been none. So this is the major point, that we would not like to see the arms race going into the other fields where it hasn't been yet, because this only can make our planet a less safe place to live. That's it.
All right. Before we get a chance to talk with our two American specialists, I want to talk to you for a moment about the initial subject that I raised this evening, and that is the undue expectations that may be raised in Geneva by the very presence of so many hundreds, almost 1,000, of my colleagues in Geneva. Are you concerned by that at all?
Yes, in a way, but maybe not exactly in the way some other people would see it, because there are quite a few journalists from the Soviet Union and other countries, and I would say that this is a normal and healthy development, because we have to admit that over the last 3 years, take out the talks that were held in Geneva before, this is one of the major achievements between the United States and the Soviet Union. It has to have some prominence, which it has. On the other hand, what bothers me, for example, is that somehow in the Western quarters, people are trying to capitalize on the attention of the press to this development.
Capitalize in what way?
Yes, and use it to put it down, to sort of play it down. They use the press to distribute the press releases or come up with some analysis that you don't have to expect much from this kind of talks. You don't have to expect, which is to say that if the negotiations fail, nothing wrong happened. We just thought it would go this way.
Very quickly, because I do want to get to our other guests. Here's your opportunity then to make a more courageous kind of prediction. What do you think is going to come out of them?
Well, I think that the target that has been set for these talks allows us to have some very good hope for a positive decision made by the two countries involved, which would benefit the rest of the world.
That was a wonderfully impenetrable diplomatic kind of statement. What do you think is going to come out of these talks?
Yeah,
anything more than setting the stage for more talks?
Yes, if the United States shows this time the kind of attitude that the world expects from the other side, yes, we may come up with a very sound solution of some of the major problems of today. But Ted, again, I would like to go back to what I wanted to say, and we somehow veered away. Because of that attitude that is being accumulating on the Western side, that you don't have sort of to expect too much from these expectations. I would suggest that there is a great, huge machine involved. A pre-fabricated campaign is underway to prepare the world public for the failure.
Right,
and this
let us stop
okay,
on that point, because I think I got the thrust of that, and I do want to bring our other guests in. When we come back, we'll get some different views on the issues we've raised as we talk live with Admiral Bobby Inman, former Deputy Director of the CIA, and with Time Magazine diplomatic correspondent Strobe Talbot, who's written a highly acclaimed book about the Reagan administration and arms control.
A Honda Civic wagon has such nice features. It's very clever. Smart about money. It's always there when you need it and can keep your secrets. It's very neat. Even cleans up after itself. And it looks, well, it has a great personality.
Annie, Kraft macaroni and cheese.
Mr. Kraft, your macaroni and cheese has more cheese than anyone's, right?
Right.
It tastes the cheesiest.
Right.
So it should be called cheese macaroni.
Annie, great idea.
Kraft macaroni and cheese has more cheese than any other brand. That's why it tastes the best.
Annie!
They might change the name, Mom. Oh? I got it straight from the top.
Kraft cheese and macaroni, the cheesiest.
Metropolitan Savings Bank has been expanding to meet your growing financial needs. As New York City's largest savings bank and one of the country's leading financial organizations, we can now provide you with more services in more places than ever before. That's why we're now Crossland. Although you'll find our name coast to coast, we're still your neighborhood bank. From Manhattan to Manhasset, Bay Ridge to Bayside. Keep in touch where your money works. Crossland Savings, your money works.
McEnroe, Lendl, Connors, the final showdown, the Volvo Masters. Come see the top 12 players in the world battle for $400,000 and the world's #1 ranking at the 1985 Volvo Masters presented by Chase Bank. January 8th through the 13th at Madison Square Garden. For information, call 212-370-1534. Tickets on sale now at Madison Square Garden, all Chase Banks and Ticket World. Who will claim victory? Don't miss the action.
Welcome to Con Edison's Conservation Center at 42nd Street and Lexington Avenue.
Wow!
An exciting exhibit filled with energy-saving and money-saving ideas, plus answers.
You can buy this at
Have fun while discovering simple, helpful ways to save energy, which will save you money around your home or apartment.
I should have come here sooner.
Visit the Con Edison Conservation Center in the Chrysler Building at 42nd and Lexington. It's something we all have to do.
Joining us live now from our affiliate KVUE in Austin, Texas, Admiral Bobby Inman, former Deputy Director of the CIA and an expert on so-called Star Wars anti-missile technology. And in our Washington bureau, Strobe Talbot, whom I knew from a different incarnation as diplomatic correspondent for Time Magazine. He is now their Washington bureau chief. More to the point, he is author of Deadly Gambits, the definitive book on arms control negotiations. Admiral Inman, let me begin with you. Let me try analyzing, which I used to do years ago, what our Soviet friend said from Canada a moment ago. I interpret that as being, if things go badly, then that's the way the United States wanted it to be in the first place. If we wanted it to go well, it is within our power to do that.
You're exactly on target.
And
one other correction I would make, in sort of letting the U.S. always be the one who moves out to new areas for new weapons, Soviets are the ones with the operational anti-satellite system. The U.S. does not have an operational one.
Why do you think the Soviet Union initiated or agreed to come to those talks?
Soviets painted themselves into a corner. with the propaganda campaign they had going in Western Europe to block the deployment of cruise missile and Pershing. When the shoot-down of the Korean airliner caused that whole effort to collapse, they didn't have an easy retreat. But they're practical people. They believe there is a genuine prospect that the Strategic Defense Initiative would work. And I believe that concern, that fear, is the primary factor in the initiative that they've now started for a new round of talks.
Strobe, Talmadge, let me ask you, does it really matter whether it will work or not work as long as the Soviets believe that it might?
Well, I think that's your question suggests a good point. The very danger that it might work, that is an American strategic defense initiative might work, obviously casts a whole pall of uncertainty over their own military planning. And also, Ted, they have to worry a great deal whenever the United States moves into a whole new area of military technology. Perhaps Star Wars might be disappointing to those who hope that it'll give us an impenetrable defense of our populations, but who knows what other military benefits it might give to the United States that the Soviets would then have to contend with. They're very frightened of American technology, and Star Wars is a kind of apotheosis of that, and therefore terribly worrisome to them.
All right, if you were responding to Alexander Podolkin, and indeed there's no reason why he can't jump in right now, and he has said to us, it is really in American hands to make this thing go well beyond the kind of limited goals that, that I sketched out earlier, you would say what? Was the question so vague, Strobe? It was to you.
Sorry, I wasn't sure it was to me, Ted.
No, it is.
Yeah, I think that there is certainly an opportunity there for these talks to lead to very significant reductions in offensive weaponry, which is one of the possibilities.
What would the United States have to do? Forswear Star Wars?
Well, perhaps it's not about to do that. So that question really doesn't arise in the context of the talks that are going on now. The Reagan administration has made absolutely clear that Star Wars, in the words of Robert McFarlane, the President's National Security Advisor, is not a bargaining chip. However, down the road, as it becomes a little clearer what the United States really has in mind when it's talking about the Strategic Defense Initiative, if it becomes apparent, for example, that what we have in mind is some kind of more limited plan to defend our strategic offensive weapons, then it might be possible to have some kind of trade-off back and forth between offense and defense. Now, it's not at all certain, of course, that the Soviets will sign on to that, nor is it certain that that's what the administration will eventually come to.
Mr. Podolkin, let me just be absolutely clear that I understand your position and how it reflects the Soviet position. In order for these talks to be successful, in order for them to move on to a really useful next stage, is it possible for the Soviet Union to do anything constructive right away, or must the first step, from your point of view, come from the United States?
I wouldn't be able to tell you right away who is supposed to make the first step. The first step has been done as far as we are concerned.
And that is what?
That is the beginning of talks. This is the first major step, and if the next step is done in the direction of limiting the arms stockpiles, of curbing the arms race, of preventing from going into new areas, that would be the positive development we are looking for. And that is exactly the whole idea behind the talks. Other than that, we didn't have other goals of going for the talks. The talks were called exactly to minimize the threat of the war, to stop the new technology, destructive nuclear, whatever, sophisticated technology going into space and so on. And if the two sides would be able to find some common grounds in this particular framework, there is a good chance that we might see a better world weeks from now or months from now.
Admiral Inman, if that is indeed the framework, how do you rate the chances then? If it requires that at some point or another the United States indicate a willingness to step back from research into strategic defense initiative, is it realistic?
Standardly, we've not agreed to cut off research and arms control agreements. We've not gone forward with deployments or hopefully reduced forces. My understanding, sitting down here in my quiet southwestern part of the U.S., is that what we're expecting to see out of Geneva is the framework for talks that are going to run for 1, 2, maybe 3 years before we see an actual agreement. It seems to me the question really is, are we going to have several different negotiations going on at the same time, or will we try to do it all in one major package? The U.S. has 6 to 8 years of research before we really are in a position to make any kind of judgments on deployment of a strategic defense initiative.
If that is so, Admiral Inman, then clearly we would not be in a position. I mean, if you're saying the research is going to go on anyway, then how can you negotiate something away, the research, I'm going to say this badly, for which the research hasn't yet even been done?
What you would actually negotiate away is a decision to deploy. And with the ABM treaty, we did not cut off research in the ABM area. We made a decision not to proceed to deploy. And frankly, I think the Soviets would settle for that. They'd be happy if we didn't do the research. They worry about its outcome. But what they're out for here is to get a treaty that would preclude the deployment of the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Gentlemen, it is almost impossible to try to discuss in the space of 20 minutes or so what will take months, maybe years to negotiate, but I'm very grateful to the three of you for joining us this evening. Thank you. I'll be back in a moment.
As the following series of unrehearsed scenes should tell you, when Mrs. Pauls asked critics to try their crispy, crunchy fish sticks and fillets, they gave them a rave. Mrs. Pauls, crispier, crunchier fish sticks and fish fillets. When was the last time your kids had this much fun eating something this good? Mrs. Pauls, it tastes good because it is good.
One ground decaffeinated coffee tastes so smooth and rich. So incredibly smooth and rich, it's grown to be the biggest seller in the country. But now Brim is offering you a big choice, because now there's new Brim Dark Roast with a taste that's dark, hearty, and robust. So now when you fill your cup to the rim, you have a big decision. Regular roast or new dark roast.
Whoa, big fella. It's me, Lawrence of Queens, New York's brand new, dashing, daring Chevrolet dealer. Come on out to Lawrence Chevrolet, Queens Boulevard and 69th Road, and let Lawrence of Queens be your hero with some of the best deals in New York on Chevrolet cars and trucks. Hey, why pay heavy for a Chevy? It's worth a trip from anywhere to get the car of your dreams from Lawrence of Queens. Right, Fido? Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow, Steve Bell with the first news from the Geneva Arms Talks, and Kathleen Sullivan with the rest of the news from Washington on ABC's World News This Morning before Good Morning America.
I'm David Hartman. Can the Soviets be trusted in arms negotiations? Tomorrow from Geneva, I'll talk with William Colby and Harold Brown about trusting and dealing with the Soviets on Good Morning America.
Tomorrow on World News Tonight, Peter Jennings will again anchor from Geneva with full coverage of the second day of the U.S.-Soviet talks on the issue of arms control negotiations. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Journal Graphics, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York 10023. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.